They were here for early service too. I wonder if a law were passed and it became illegal to pray, would there be enough evidence to convict you in court? I wonder if it became illegal to pray and the government planted cameras inside your house to catch you at what you do, would they get evidence that you are a man or a woman of prayer so that you could be convicted? We take praying as something for granted. We take it that our liberties will never be taken away from us. But the Bible does tell us about a time when praying was illegal. It's in the book of Daniel, chapter 6. It's the great story, Daniel in the lion's den. My kids always loved this story when they were small. This was a favorite for Bible charades at Friday night and Saturday night sundown worship. I mean, how many times can you act out Daniel in the lion's den without kind of getting the idea from the very beginning? This was a favorite. My daughter also loved Baby Moses. Every week we did Baby Moses. Every week we did Daniel in the lion's den. Every week when my daughter would act out Baby Moses, we all had to go, "Oh, surprise, Baby Moses," But this story, Daniel in the lion's den, it's a favorite. Now, I want to remind you of something I've taught you before, but some of you may not have been here and heard me teach this, or you've forgotten. We've been studying our way through the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel has two kinds of material. One is the prophetic material. And the prophetic material is focused on telling us about the time of the end, when it will be, and what history will be like leading up to the time of the end. So finally, Daniel chapter 8:14 tells us that the time of the end will be about 1844. So the prophecies tell us when, but the stories tell us something else about the time of the end. And the stories tell us what kind of people we need to be to stand in the time of the end. The stories tell us what character we need to have. The stories tell us what our behavior needs to be. The stories tell us how we need to act so that we can stand in the time of the end. So the prophecies tell us when, the stories tell us how. And so this story of Daniel in the lion's den speaks to us. It's something very important. It has something very important to tell us about the time of the end and what kind of people we should be now. This is not just a great bedtime story, but learn its lesson for us today. We start off in the book of Daniel, chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Daniel chapter 6, 1 and 2. There's been a change of regime. Daniel 5:30 says, "That very night Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old." In a short 2 verses, we go from the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire. We go from Belshazzar, the last king of the Babylonian Empire, to Darius the Mede, the first king of the Medo-Persian Empire. Verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps would give account, so that the king might not suffer loss. This is an amazing story. The new king comes in, he conquers the Babylonians, and he puts Daniel in essence, second in command of his kingdom. Daniel, who was in the prior administration, he had been in the prior administration under Nebuchadnezzar. Remember the very last night, he had been elevated to being the third in control of the Babylonian Empire. So he was, probably one of the shortest reigns ever of being in control. But he was an official in the government. And when Darius comes in, he's looking for someone to put in charge, and he spots Daniel. Now, who in the world would conquer a country and put the prior administration in office? This is just crazy. It would kind of be like, some of you remember the days of the Cold War. It would kind of be like the Russians coming in and conquering the United States and then making Henry Kissinger the vice president. It wouldn't have happened. It doesn't make sense. But Darius could see something special about Daniel. Verse 3. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other presidents and satraps because an excellent spirit was found in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Daniel is about 80 years old, but he must have been in pretty good shape. He had been eating healthfully for all those years in Babylon, because remember, he refused to eat the king's food, and he ate what he knew God would be pleased with. And an 80-year-old man in this time period was a very, very old man or woman, because the length of span of life was much, much shorter. And so Daniel is set up as the chief of the presidents, and probably just barely under Darius himself. Now, what was Daniel's task? What was his job? Look at the end of verse 2. It says that over the three of them was Daniel, to whom the satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. In other words, under Daniel, there was no good old boys network. There was no you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You turn your eyes the other direction, I'll turn my eyes the other direction. Daniel's responsibility was to make sure that the king was not stolen from, to make sure that the king got his due. Bribery, extortion, all those things were rampant in the ancient administrations. And so Daniel's responsibility was to keep the king's money safe. The end, so that there would be no damage or loss. So Daniel was the watchdog for the king. And he was very careful. He was so careful that everyone who worked underneath him hated him, because they wanted to get rich off the king. And Daniel would check their expense reports. Daniel would check how much of tribute and how much taxes had come in. And he would only allow them to keep the proper amounts, and all the rest went into the king's treasury. Daniel was a loyal servant of the king, watching over the king. And that's why the king loved him so much. I heard someone say one time that if there's anything that was worse than being Daniel in the lion's den, it was being a lion in Daniel's den. Because Daniel would not put up with lions. He made sure that everything was perfect. And so the presidents and the princes and the satraps hated Daniel because they couldn't get rich. They couldn't pad their expense reports, and they could not steal from the king. And so they hated Daniel. And so they began to hatch a plan. We've got to find some way to get Daniel out of office. They began to wonder, well, maybe he keeps two sets of books. Maybe he's being careful of the king's money that we want to steal, so he can steal it. So maybe he's got a secret bank account somewhere in Switzerland. I don't know. So they began looking for his Swiss bank account. No, it's not there. I mean, they think about Daniel, no one is that squeaky clean, right? And so they began looking. Well, he's a foreigner in a country. Is maybe he fomenting revolt? Late at night, are people coming to his door with a secret knock so Daniel will know it's them, so they can conspire against the king. Maybe Daniel's being so careful with the king's money because they're going to conspire and overthrow him and steal all of his money. You know, people who do bad things think the worst of other people. And so therefore they start looking for some way to get Daniel out of office, some chink in his armor, some dirty laundry, some skeleton in his closet. And they can't find one. And so they hatch a different plan. And I think the reason they hatch this plan is because of one outstanding characteristic that Daniel had. One outstanding characteristic. Daniel chapter 6, verse 5. It says, "Then these men said, we shall not find no fault, no ground for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." There was one characteristic about Daniel. He was loyal to his God and he obeyed his God's law. And they contrived this plan that if there's any way we can find some way to get rid of Daniel, it'll have to be concerning his God and the law of his God. He loved his God. And they knew that he would do nothing to compromise his walk with God. And so this is the idea they had. Find fault with him concerning his God. And another thing that they must have been, having observed him doing, was praying. That he must have been known as a man of prayer, and a man who loved his God, and as a man who prayed. Later on it tells us, Edson read it in the scripture reading, it was his custom to open his window toward Jerusalem and pray 3 times every single day. They must have seen him do this. He had the reputation for doing this. And so they hatched this plan that perhaps they can catch him up like this. So they appear to the king, Daniel chapter 6, verses 6 through 9, and give him this wonderful idea, this honor they want to bestow upon him. Then these presidents and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever." You know, this is what people do when they're trying to sidle up to you and try to get you to do something for them, you know. I remember when my kids were younger, sometimes they'd come up and say, "Daddy, we love you." And my response would be, "What do you want?" So it's kind of like these guys, "Oh, King, we love you." And he just bites. I mean, he just gets hooked, line, and sinker. "Oh, King, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, everyone who's anyone, are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, should be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked." Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. "O king, live forever. We think you should declare the next month the month of Darius. No one else can pray to any other god or man." And understand that Darius was both. He was looked upon as a god in addition to being the king. When the king became the king, he was looked upon as having been elevated to godhood status. And so he was no longer just the king, he was the god, the earthly incarnation of their God. And so that's why any law that the king signed could not be revoked. I mean, how can a God make a mistake? So the law of the Medes and Persians. We have that idiom in English today, right? It's not, this is, I hear people say this is not according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which suggests that a law could be changed. But this law could not be changed, and Darius fell for it. And he signed the law. He must have just been very flattered and very foolish, of course, but must have been very flattered that they would want to do this great honor for him. So he signed the edict, and anyone who would bow and pray to another god or king would be thrown into the den of lions. By the way, in that ancient time period, there were lions. You know, people think of lions only in Africa. There were lions in the Middle East at that point in time. And there are actually ancient reliefs and carved in palaces that show the king going out on a lion hunt and killing lions. Very fascinating. It's what's also fascinating is you see the king killing a lion, and off on the sides you find out that he's not out there killing the lion alone. The whole army's with him. You know, so like he's protected. The lion has been in a cage off the side of the relief. He was in a cage, and they let him come out. So you know, the king was not really at risk very much. But there were lions in that land. And so there was this den of lions that was like for capital punishment. And so anyone who prays to another god will be thrown into the den of lions. Verse 10. I love verse 10. Verse 10, I've tried to tell you each chapter, I think, has a core verse that really summarizes the whole chapter. This is my core verse for Daniel 6. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, Daniel could not have claimed ignorance of the law. And you know, ignorance of the law is no excuse. If you don't know that the speed limit is 35 in one place and you're going 65, you tell the cop, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was 35. He's going to say, oh, that's okay. He's going to write you up. I'm just going to tell you. So ignorance of the law is no excuse. Daniel cannot plead that. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. This was his pattern. He opened his windows 3 times a day and prayed toward Jerusalem. And when he knew the decree had been signed, he went and opened his windows and prayed 3 times a day toward Jerusalem, breaking the law of the land. Of course, we must obey God rather than man, right? They told us that in the New Testament, Acts. So he began to pray. I really love this. He knew the decree had been signed. Now, unfortunately, Daniel did not have the book Steps to Christ at his disposal. The book Steps to Christ was written in 1892. Had Daniel had the book Steps to Christ at his disposal, he could have turned to page number 98, where it says, pray in your closet. Daniel would have been wise to pray in his closet, but that would have given the inference that he was obeying the law, and he was not going to obey the law. So he opened his windows and he began to pray 3 times a day. And, of course, they were watching. They had guards. Had they had video cameras, they would have been rolling. But they didn't. So they had witnesses, probably more than one, who saw Daniel praying, and immediately, you know what they did. They went to the king. Verse number 11. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, they didn't even say live forever because they were so excited that they'd caught Daniel. O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. And then they sprang at a trap. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, and the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Darius knew he had been tricked. He continues on, verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored until the sun went down to rescue him. He didn't want to do it. He knew he'd been tricked. But his officials said, no, you have to do this. You have no choice. You can't break the law that you have signed. You cannot save him. So Darius had no choice but to throw Daniel into the den of lions. But he does it in a very interesting way. Verse 16. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you. Here you have a pagan king praying for Daniel. May your God deliver you. It sounds almost as though this pagan king who only wanted to be prayed to himself, it sounds as though he believed that Daniel's God could deliver him. Oh, Daniel, may your God, whom you continually serve, deliver you. And the stone was brought and laid in the place. It was sealed with the king's signet ring, and they waited. The king goes back to his palace. I've always thought this is really, really humorous because verse number 18 says, then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Daniel is in the lion's den at peace, surrounded by lions. And Darius is in his palace in torture, praying for Daniel. He's fasting. He doesn't want food. He doesn't want drink. He doesn't want the women to come in. He doesn't want music. It's such a funny thing to me. That Daniel is at peace and Darius is tormented. And Daniel is doing more than just at peace. I think it's funny that Darius stayed up all night and Daniel probably caught some sleep. But I think Daniel was doing something else. Prayer had gotten Daniel into this, and it was prayer that got him out. I see Daniel in the den of lions, kneeling and praying to God for his deliverance, believing that he will be delivered. Prayer would get him out. Daniel in the lion's den, dark, dank, at peace. Well, in the morning, chapter 6, verse 19, then at the break of day, it's not like he waited any longer. At sunrise, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. And he came near to the den where Daniel was. He cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Now, if Daniel had been a prankster, he probably just would have waited a while. But he wasn't. He says, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him and also before you, O king. I have done no harm. Prayer and the time of the lions. Prayer gets Daniel through the time of the lions. It got him in the lion's den, but it got him out of the lion's den. Now remember, I said this is more than just a great story and a good bedtime story. This tells us what kind of people we must be if we're going to stand in the time of the lion. Because we, in this point of Earth's history, we are also in the lion's den. The lion this time is singular, not plural. I'll remind you of this text. You know this text. 1 Peter 5:8. 1 Peter 5:8. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. That's you. We live in the time of the lion. Satan is a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. That's you. That's me. What can get us through the time when we are facing the lion? We must be people of prayer. If I read this passage right, it tells us that prayer is much more than just simply a nice thing for nice Christians to do. Prayer is that which will fortify our relationship with Jesus so that we can stand no matter what happens. Period. How can we stand in the time of the lion with prayer? Now, this is a new thought that hit me this week. It says the devil prowls like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. A roaring lion is noisy. But I will suggest to you that in this role, Satan is simply a lion wannabe. Because there is another lion. Revelation chapter 5, verse 5. Revelation chapter 5, verse 5. We're looking into the very throne room of God in this vision of Revelation chapter 5. Revelation 5 says, and one of the elders said to me, weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. There is a real lion, and that lion is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Satan is a lion wannabe. He's an imposter because the real lion is Jesus. I wonder, some of you know the story of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. I wonder if this text is why C.S. Lewis chose the symbol of a lion to represent Jesus in that book, and actually in the whole series. Satan acts like a lion, but Jesus is the real lion, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. I saw on an internet video the other day, some time ago, on YouTube. What would we do without YouTube, right? It was posted on Facebook and then went to YouTube. It was a video. I have no idea how they shot this video. I looked at it. I just don't know how they got the footage, whether it's real or somehow contrived. I really can't tell. But it's a video that shows a young bear cub. And the young bear cub is being stalked by a mountain lion. And the mountain lion is much fiercer and much stronger than this bear cub. And there's no question in your mind as you watch this mountain lion stalk this bear cub, you have no question that he can take him. And the mountain lion can kill this bear cub. And so the mountain lion is chasing the bear cub, and the bear cub just barely gets away, and he falls into a stream, and he he rolls around in the stream and he goes downstream and he gets back out on the other side, and somehow the mountain lion has gotten over on the other side, and they're tussling, and you think this bear cub is just dead. You think he's gone. And the bear cub turns around and kind of stands up and goes, ah! Roars, but it's a baby bear roar. And you think, well, that's not going to do any good. And the mountain lion is advancing on him, and the baby bear roars, and suddenly you see the mountain lion runs off. And then the camera pans out, and you see more than just the baby bear. The camera pans out, and you see the mama grizzly bear standing behind the baby bear going, rah! I don't know how, it's just a great video. I don't know how they shot it, I don't know, but I loved it. When you feel like the lion is stalking you, remember the Lion of the tribe of Judah stands behind you. How can we make it through the time of the end? By making sure we're connected with the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Making sure that our connection with Jesus is strong. That can only happen by being men and women of prayer. If ever there was a time when we need to commit ourselves to prayer, it's this time, in the time of the end. If ever there were a people who need to commit themselves to prayer, it is us. We see it happen in the story of Daniel. Prayer got him into trouble, but prayer got him out. Be people of prayer. Now, I wanted to sing a song that